Hey everybody, thanks for coming out tonight. I'm Vishal Jagdeo, and I'm assistant professor and area head in new genres at the UCLA Department of Art. It's crazy that you can't see anything. I have no idea who's in the audience. It's a pleasure to introduce Jacolby Satterwhite, who's the Art Council Chair for the Winter Quarter. Thanks to the Hammer Museum for hosting the lecture and all of the art department visiting artist lectures, and to Claudia and Carla and the team for all your hard work in putting the evening together. Jacolby Satterwhite is celebrated for a conceptual practice addressing crucial themes of labor, consumption, carnality, and fantasy through immersive installation, virtual reality, and digital media. He uses a range of software to produce intricately detailed animations and live action film of real and imagined worlds populated by the avatars of artists and friends. These animations serve as a stage on which the artist synthesizes the multiple disciplines that encompass his practice, namely illustration, performance, painting, sculpture, photography, and writing. Satterwhite draws from an extensive set of references guided by queer theory, modernism, and video game language to challenge the conventions of Western art through a personal and political lens. An equally significant influence is that of his late mother, Patricia Satterwhite, whose diagrams for visionary household products and ethereal vocals serve as the source material within a decidedly complex structure of memory and mythology. I've followed Jacolby's work closely ever since seeing his work in the 2014 Whitney Biennial. And I remember in particular being drawn to the in-between moments, glimpses of casual intimacy, sometimes even laughter between the performers. These subtle moments provide a window into the real, and this tension between the real and constructed is one that I find especially endlessly fascinating in his practice. I don't think he's going to speak about this project, but he presented a little bit in my class yesterday, which sort of expands his work into the realm of social practice in a way that I consider to be so vital, and which speaks to the critical and resistant energy that has always been present in his work. So Jacolby Satterwhite was born in 1986 in Columbia, South Carolina. He received his BFA from the Maryland Institute College of Arts in Baltimore and his MFA from the University of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. Satterwhite's work has been presented in numerous exhibitions and festivals internationally, including most recently at Haus der Kunst Munich in 2021, Gwangju Biennale in Gwangju 2021, the Wexner Center for the Arts in Columbus, Ohio in 2021, the Fabric Workshop and Museum in Philadelphia in 2019, Pioneer Works in New York in 2019, and the list really goes on. He was awarded the United States Francie Bishop Good and David Horvitz Fellowship in 2016. His work is included in the collections of the Museum of Contemporary Art Kiasma in Helsinki, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Studio Museum in Harlem, and the Whitney Museum of American Art, among several others. In 2019, Satterwhite collaborated with Solange Knowles on her visual album, When I Get Home. So please join me in welcoming Jacolby.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. So thank you for sticking around and watching my latest six-part anthology, Birds in Paradise. That was the first time I think I've shown the project in a sort of theater setting in its entirety, and I learned a lot from it. Uh, so, and I learned how to, figure out how to expand on that and make it better. So I guess I'm gonna try to keep you guys entertained because I know you've been here for a long time. um, so let's get started. Well, I think I just will explain kind of how I got here. Um, so I guess I'm giving a trajectory talk today. I mean, it's been like 12 years of like mining my own personal histories and intersecting them with like public narratives. But some of you may know this history, but I'll begin to talk about it again. So this project is called The Matriarch's Rhapsody. It was created in 2012, and it's sort of like the codex or the legend of my of the mythos of like the last 12 years of work between the series is Reifying Desire and the Birds in Paradise series, among other miscellaneous videos. What you're looking at on the left side are my mother's drawings, Patricia Satterwhite, and in the middle are these three-dimensional renderings of those drawings. And on the right are animated videos where those objects exist, and family photographs, mostly taken by my father, that kind of are sort of the template for that material culture that she was mining as a like retrospective of her memories. The story behind the drawings is that my mother was diagnosed with schizophrenia when I was a child. After my father, shortly after my father lost his local grocery store, we kind of like went into deep poverty, and it was really a strange time where like we went from like being super comfortable, and I was like a 5-year old like in a different kind of like we had a different kind of like we had a different kind of home, and then eventually it was so bad to where I guess people were like donating like buckets of fish to our house. It was really weird, and my mother kind of had like a mental breakdown, and what she wanted to kind of she kind of wanted to basically repair the loss by making schematic diagrams of common objects that would be inventions that she would send to the Home Shopping Network and QVC and to pay. And they were inspired by these paid programs that she was watching till 5 o'clock in the morning that was telling middle Americans that they can be an inventor too. So when I was a kid, I didn't know that she was doing this triggered by, the decline of her mental health. I thought this delusion of grandeur was a reality, and it inspired me to become an artist. I was so envious of her prolific, feverish intensity of making drawings from 6 in the morning till midnight. And my dad was so supportive and wonderful. He would buy her glitter crayons and markers and, different kinds of vellum paper and typing paper. And she would, I wanted to use her art art utensils, and she told me I had to learn how to draw before I broke her crayons and used them. So I basically, looked at any kind of drawing tutorial I could from the library. I would check out books and learn how to draw in order to be her like assistant or her apprentice. Around the time I turned age 10, I realized that, I guess the mental illness progressed into full blown schizophrenia around the time that I got diagnosed with cancer. And so when I went into the hospital, she went into the mental hospital. And we both had our own times away. I played video games in the mental hospital and made drawings as a coping mechanism. And she recorded music in the mental hospital and continued to make drawings. But this time the drawings stopped having color and they became black and white. The drawings started to have like weird fragmented poetry. I always compare the poetry of her descriptions of the objects like Gertrude Stein poems because they're kind of repetitive, like repetition and contradictory oxymoronic language was a very important part of the drawings. But when I was in the hospital, I was making paintings and I was playing Final Fantasy all day, and that was my escapism. I was looking at screens and paper as a way to cope with the chemotherapy and my surgeries. When I healed, we both got home. She continued to draw, and I didn't acknowledge her. I was kind of hiding away from her in my room, playing video games and making paintings. I went to boarding school eventually when I was like 16, 15, and moved away from home, 5 hours away from home. And I studied painting in boarding school. And then I went, I wasn't thinking about her making drawings, but I was like trying to assimilate into the Western canon and find my voice as a painter. I went to undergrad and studied painting, and I went to graduate school and studied painting. But uh, I had a lot of difficulties having a conversation around painting without my professors and my peers mining my race and my gender. I mean, my race, my sexuality, and also my black contemporary. No, the black, the only five black famous people who I could look at, who they could look at to like as a marker to that they say that, oh, you remind me of this and you should do this. And I just didn't like the limited conversation around it, so I just started to try to look inward, and I started to think about. Well, I was through like a series of events. I was trying to figure out like how can I have more agency over my practice. And so I was reading a lot and reading about performance and installation and looking at interdisciplinary artists and having conversations with like mentors. And one day I went back home when I was like 20 to South Carolina during Christmas, and my mother was still drawing. Like I was like, what? It was like 10,000 of these drawings. And when I went home and I looked at the drawings, after being jaded about her and not really paying her any attention, like with the drawing, I mean, like as an artist, I looked at her drawings after having a very robust education, taking 2,000 drawing classes and painting classes and sculpture classes, and for being very super immersed in academia. I looked at her drawings and I was like, whoa, like Katie Coates, who like you literally can draw so well. Like I was realizing that like the economy in her line, the history and the marks, the ability to kind of stage the composition in a way that was very like she basically developed a very singular language that you would have to I thought that you would have to learn from like having a peer group and like being in a studio with like in a public narrative and having an audience. She had no audience. She made these drawings out of necessity. The pencil on the page was her way of muting the voices in her head. And the fact that drawings were medicinal was like very provocative for me. And so I realized that like if she's making a work from a place of necessity and urgency, then this is something that I need to learn how to do myself. And I took the drawings with me to New York City, and I made a few experimental pieces with them. And I didn't think about the drawings as like a tribute to her, but I thought about the drawings as like, oh, in the 30s and 40s, when I was thinking about the history of like performance art scores in the 30s and 40s, when a lot of World War II was happening, and a lot of artists were rejecting painting as a propagandistic form that kind of led the illiterate to kind of have an Orwellian, just like painting was what led to lies and war. And so performance and surrealism came about as a way to reject painting. And so they made absurdist performance scores and they performed to them. They like people would do surrealist, exquisite corpse games, and people would, and that was kind of like a strategy that was like, well, I'm going to reject painting, so why not make my mother's drawings into scores? And so I basically, sorry, I'm a little sorry. So basically, I kind of like looked at her drawings, and I got a Walmart point and shoot camera, and I would perform her drawings like they were performance art scores from the Fluxus and Dada period. I just performed at Central Park, and I performed in Chanel boutiques, and I performed in Baltimore, and I submitted the videos to Skowhegan, and I got into Skowhegan, and eventually that's when I went to Skowhegan, and I started to continue to perform, and then I realized that like I really needed tactility to return to the medium. I needed like the medium to feel like paintings again. So I started to research animation processes and teach myself new things. And like I got much more, like this was around the time when I was in graduate school, and I eventually realized that from experimentation and learning After Effects and Maya, I learned this process that I could trace the drawings, make with and use the vector lines and extrude them into pipes and add planes to them. And I could make a toy box, a codex, a legend, like the video games I played when I was in a hospital. When I played Final Fantasy, you had a weapon system with magic and materia and swords and lore. And I basically could make this Dungeons and Dragons kind of like archive that I could basically map out into an infinite digital world. And it wouldn't be about my personal life, my mother. It would be about this archive that I could put anything on top of. This the archive that I can map out worlds to like reflect on contemporary politics, philosophy. It could be a journal. It could be like a primer, a conceptual primer to an canvas to an infinite world. And so eventually, so one of the pieces that I created. So one of the first pieces that was successfully using this language was Country Ball 1989 through 2012. This piece was created. So one thing I had this home footage from 1989 when I was a 3-year-old, and I was so obsessed with initially because it was the first document of me being queer. Because in the video, I am subscribing to like I wanted to be associated with my female cousins and their I was like I wanted to perform like them, I wanted to move like them, I wanted the vernacular of female expression, but my blue collar homophobic kind of family at the time, they were like, steering me towards my male cousins, and like it was sort of like just a normal thing in the 80s. It was very like a black family, you know. And I thought that was really interesting. You just see a lot. There's a lot of subtle nuances in all the politics in this piece. But one thing I also noticed that this piece kind of has a. It was this piece also was in this the camcorder footage was also from Mother's Day, and I was thinking about like, wow, this is kind of like a Nigerian Gelede masquerade kind of culture performance, like what they would like in Yoruba culture. Like I was reading a lot of Robert Farris Thompson's his book Flash of the Spirit, and I was reading about the way that in Nigeria they have these like in the Gelede masquerade performance. Since they come together and they build sculpture and costuming and choreography and a very humanities kind of discipline, kind of like a pastoral scene. They kind of come together and they perform to worship the Queen Mother. And I was like, oh, so it's kind of like a diasporic thing that we as Black people continue to do in America. And then I continued to think about the piece, and I was like, but this piece also has like all the recreational material culture that was in my mother's drawings. KFC buckets, Jeeps, cars, the clothing. It just had basically all of the architecture that she was kind of making into like grid like Da Vincian forms. So I was like, oh wow, what if I like composited all of the drawings that I three dimensionalized into this CGI pastoral concert scene and recreate that performance? Because at the time when I made it, performance was entering the museum space as like the people. I think performance was being reframed a lot between 2009 and 2012. And Marina Abramovic had that crazy exhibition at the MoMA, and I remember Clifford Owens had a great exhibitions at PS1 MoMA, and I remember just in all of the periodicals and critical essays, it was a lot about the certificate of authenticity behind performances and selling them to institutions. And I thought, well, this camcorder footage this is my certificate of authenticity. This is my like, this is a performance that I want to reperform. So I was thinking it was kind of clever to take a camcorder video and reperform it into a CGI film as if it was like, how some directors like remaster a film. It was kind of like remastering a memory. And so like I, sold all these costumes that were abstractions of the 80s costumes, and to reclaim that memory, I performed as my family in 100 different ways on the green screen. And so when you get to this part of the video where it's like, so it eventually goes inside of this carousel, and instead of being a banal kind of like folly scene where people are just dancing around, this heavenly blue collar capitalist space starts to disintegrate. The American dream gets burned down by this flag that I'm holding. And from then on, you start to see a sort of like Dante's Inferno kind of chaos. And so it sort of feels like this weird time-based garden of earthly delights. Another thing that I enjoyed about this piece is that I started to understand. So when I'm dancing on top of a cake. My mother made drawings of cakes a lot, and I thought, what if I make this cake into a skyscraper and I put my body on it at very small scale, and it's kind of like this dungeon contraption, and it's a flaming American dream. It's having a pendulum effect flying above me. Now, having agency to do this came from I was reading a lot of books about queer phenomenology. One book by Sarah Altman, and it was just talking about how like objects. It was talking about object orientation and how we define our ideas about ourselves in relationship to objects. Like a librarian has a library table, a chef has a chef table with knives on it. Like we have expectations around animism, and so in order to kind of queer the expectations of in order to queer expectations, I thought like, okay, take control of this blue collar American family moment and completely blow it up into something absurdist and have my body do things like shrink and expand and be next to objects in very unfamiliar ways, where everything in this new world, it has no gender. The object has no real concrete purpose. The object can be purposed on its own. It was sort of like a radical kind of exploration. And so as we move on, you see this cake is like the Tower of Babel, and you can see my family is rotoscoped onto the cake, and it's really whimsical and fun. But eventually, this landscape tends to break down into this giant's mouth, and he's eating up the whole space in this very like decadent way, and it's really goofy. But what I really love about the ending is that I got to create this interesting formal moment from tracing my family footage for 31 days. And I took the Roto Bezier tool and put it on top of a star chart. And I made basically the giant eats up the entire world. And the only thing that's left is a constellation of this memory, which is it was sort of like a poetic reference to what got me and my family and got my art practice to where it is today. Sorry. And also, the music comes from my brothers are both queer as well, and they would go to clubs in New York City and Atlanta and bring back these amazing acid house songs from the gay clubs and bars. Like they would buy the mixtapes and play them for in my at my family's cookouts, which was very ironic. So that's what you're hearing. The volume is kind of low. Okay. All right. So after that, I decided I wanted to do stuff that was less about my family and familial or whatever. And I wanted to do a series that used all these archives I was mining from my mother and from the public, like, and from Google and from taking live action footage on my camera and stocking it up on my computer. I basically had like, 4 terabytes of information that I wanted to kind of like use as a sort of kind of like a sculpture bank or a collage bank. And I decided to create this series called Reifying Desire. So it's reification, the term reification is basically how do you describe something in a concrete way that really has no, that's not physical. Like love, you can't really draw love. You can't really make us love a sculpture. Like love is such an abstract, existential kind of space and feeling, but there's no object for love. So, in a way that's, I was thinking about poetically, what's the principle behind the way that like how my mother thinks about abstraction within these objects. Like sometimes she'll make a drawing called "How Lovely Is Me Being as I Am," and underneath it are 5 objects, and it's like like where's like how does this form into one thing? So I wanted to make this surrealist anthology called Reifying Desire that would help me become a better animator and filmmaker. And the only principle I had to follow was to create 6 gestation cycles, 6 birth cycles. And the reason why I wanted to deal with gestation and birth is because anytime you take an animation class, you have to do a flip book of a flower growing out the ground or something dying. And I thought, well, I should be very like literal and not think so hard about making something, poignant or complex. I should just start with birth and then follow and allow very complicated political intense things happen within that armature of concept. And so the first chapter, we'll start with the second chapter of Reifying Desire, which was I did it in Woodstock, in upstate New York, and initially the first chapter is very ambient. It's just me performing as a forest nymph, and like I was obsessed with performing in nature because it was a place where I was looking at a lot of Miyazaki films like Princess Mononoke, which was a kind of a film that was metaphorically about, well, when I read the auteur notes, it was apparently about AIDS in the 90s. And one thing that was really interesting about that film is that the disease or the like monster that was like ravaging the narrative, it had most of its power in the city, in the place where agriculture was thriving, in the place where capitalism was thriving. But whenever it would enter nature, it was at its weakest because nature was buoyant. And like I just thought that was really compelling. So it made me want to start my piece in nature. I wanted to kind of like have a creation myth sort of beginning to the series where I'm basically creating my mother's drawings and building out the world of Reifying Desire in this chapter. And so, I mean, when we get to part 3, we see the first time I use this motif that I use this motif so much. I used the Caravaggio Doubting Thomas appropriation. I appropriated Caravaggio's Doubting Thomas with CGI figures in like three films from Reifying Desire, and you see it in one part of the Birds in Paradise series. And I made a giant sculpture out of it that was like 10 feet, and it has the monitors inside of it, which I'll show later. The reason why, I'll talk about why I'm obsessed with that motif in a second, but I just want to say this is how the one thing about Reifying Desire is that I developed a fun structure for narrative building. I so like the concept of this one, I was thinking about how like my mother had hundreds and hundreds of medical drawings because when I was in the hospital with cancer, she wasn't allowed to see me because of my child therapist thought it would be healthier if I was like healing in that way, and so she couldn't be in the hospital. But so I didn't see her for a year, and while I was gone, she was making all these drawings of everything. She was making she was making drawings of MRIs, X-rays, pills. She was kind of like making schematic diagrams about the spaces that was healing me in a way, and so I thought it'd be interesting to take all those drawings as a as a narrative spine for me to just create a surrealist film. The only thing the only rule was for me to take her drawings and the language for the drawings and put them in Microsoft Word and then write a surrealist essay narrative, like filling in the blanks between her text and my text. And then I gave myself like 5 minutes to do that, and I wanted to stay faithful to the script as an animation exercise. So this is sort of like absurdist in that way. But like within that, I kind of did certain modulations. I allowed myself to kind of like, you know, polish the narrative a bit as I was making it. But from having that kind of freedom to like massage the absurd allowed me to find so many poetic and poignant things in the in between spaces. It became like, it was an interesting way to grow as an artist. And so what you'll see is a lot of basically I create this meta narrative of like my body is sort of like an antibody or a cell or some kind of cellular structure inside of these four figures, inside of the Jesus figure, and it goes inside of his womb where they're touching the womb. I'm sorry, I probably didn't describe the narrative of the Caravaggio piece, but we'll get there in a second. So yeah, you can see this. Hold on, sorry. So one thing also I want to say is that when I was making these films, I was in Provincetown, Massachusetts for 2 years in the dark winter. You know, it was like I didn't spend the summers there. I spent the winters there at the Fine Arts Work Center. And I had a big studio, and I had just a green screen and a bottle of wine, all of the drawings on the wall. And what I would do is, I was inspired by like Bruce Naumann's objectivity in the studio, and I mean, I was really inspired by like a lot of early '60s performance artists and how like just stripping things down and working in a way that was like committed to like body language and movement in this way that would kind of as a kind of sculptural practice. So and I was inspired by William Forsythe too. I would basically like look at those 30 drawings like of pills and capsules and X-rays, and I would do variations of movement on the camera and the green screen of like taking the pills or using a hammer or a lever or a pulley, so I can have an infinite combinations of assets and movements to play with in animation to kind of create a consistent choreography that felt like that would also like lend itself to making a really interesting visual narrative and image, and also something that kind of looks like a Renaissance painting. And I guess that's where voguing kind of came into play, like voguing and modern dance, because those kind of dance styles are all about animism and objects, and they lend themselves to creating a compelling. They lend themselves to making a compelling painterly image, you know. So at the end of the video, they basically get this. This is like pregnancy. Basically, this is like these figures are poking that Jesus figure, and they're making it get pregnant, and eventually, like the baby's like getting all these little furry things on it, and then it's gonna give birth to a little cruciform, and it's really cute. A little cute little cruciform. Oh God. And so it comes out, and then you just see this like figure doing that. But yeah, this was made in 2013 or 2012, 2013. So I'm gonna skip all the way to chapter 6. So by the time I got to Reifying Desire 6, that was when Stuart Comer invited me to be in the Whitney Houston, the Whitney Houston biennial. I want to dance with somebody. Um, I was really excited. I would think I was like the last person to be invited. The show was in February, and I got invited like October 31st. I remember, and it was over email. It was not a studio visit. It was just really like it was sort of like the Easter Bunny or like some. It was just weird. It was like, hey, do you want to be in with Miami? I was like, okay. And I freaked out, and I was kind of like, I'm on the last chapter of Reifying Desire, and I just got out. I just finished the Provincetown residency and moved to New York, and I just, it's a new lease at life because that was a miserable resident. It was just like a lot, you know. Um, but I was like, I'm gonna finish Reifying a Desire with a bang. The final gestation cycle. What will it be? So in 2014 was the year when Truvada was made available to the public, and I was obsessed with like the whole hype around it. I was reading a lot of like articles on that. At the time, there was a lot of hype around and vilification of queer men who would perform bareback sex in porn or promote it on social media or whatever. And it was sort of like that was pre-cancel culture, but it was in this weird, it was just something interesting to me. And so when Truvada came out, it was sort of rewriting that narrative, and I thought about. So it made me think about like I was, making this series about gestation and breeding, and so I thought, well, why don't I get the most notorious gay porn star to be the protagonist in the final chapter of Reifying Desire, and he'll breed me, and it will make me give birth to a new city, which is the language for my next series, Birds in Paradise. But that's what I did. So, so Reifying Desire 6, basically, I shot myself in New York City on the Brooklyn Bridge and in Chinatown. I shot hours of footage of me, like, just like performing in the city. Because one thing I do outside of referencing my mother's drawings, I love to, when I build worlds, I look at Google images. I look at live action footage of me in landscapes all over the world, and I use that as an inspiration of how I like define the architecture in my 3D animations. That's kind of the visual anchor I use to organize space. It's my way of doing en plein air observation painting. Like, how you take your easel out. Like when I was 20 years old, I did a residency in Italy, and I had a backpack with an easel, and I would sit down like Cezanne and make paintings on the street listening to Foxy Brown. And so this is kind of how I do it this way in animation. I record myself in the city. I take the hard drive to my house, and then I try to animate the city too. So this is what you're seeing here. So this is actually in Marin County in the Bay Area. I did the Headlands residency, and I realized that in the Headlands residency is on an army base in Marin County that is actually the same army base that X-Men, the comic book. That's where Xavier's school was in the fiction of the comic book, like this same army base. And I thought it was funny because I like to deal with like a sort of science fiction queer otherness in my films. It was just like, oh, look, like the hero protagonist. It was just like a really fun pun, And you kind of see it in the previous chapter, Reifying Desire. I really focus in on this space, but this is the beginning of the Reifying Desire. I start out on this on the West Coast, really, but it gets on the East Coast after. Wait, let me get here. Yeah. So basically, I conceive a little egg child, and at the end, it goes down and becomes this egg, and then and then all right. And so basically, after that, I got invited to San Francisco Museum of Modern Art offered me the huge commission to do a 2-year residency to create any project I wanted. Basically, it was called a performance and process, and I wanted to. It was like, oh my god, this is my chance to create my dream project, which is what you guys came here earlier for. I spent 2 years making the album with Nick Weiss. I wanted to make my mother's cassette tape. She made 150 acapellas in the mental hospital and at home. Like these songs that were supposed to be jingles for commercials. She made the songs also to be R&B songs for people like Michael Jackson. She's just like, I'm a singer, songwriter, jingle writer. It was just really fascinating, and I was really embarrassed about it when I was a kid. But I realized the songs were really poetic and compelling, and I digitized all these American Southern folk songs that she wrote and made a techno trip hop eclectic album with it that would score a virtual reality film. So the whole thing culminated into 3 VR pieces and 6 CGI films, which you just saw, and you can experience the whole thing at Moran Gallery around the corner from you. So, as in the middle of the series, I created sculptures related to the major motifs in the project that you saw earlier. Like this is the Caravaggio. I mean, this is the I call it the my black Les Demoiselles d'Avignon women inside of one of her water tubs. And this is also another depiction of the Doubting Thomas figure that you saw in Reifying Desire 3 and also in Shrines. So in this piece, you actually see inside of the monitors on their stomachs are footage of a performance I did in 2009 where I printed out large scale viruses on the floor like SARS, HIV, and a lot of viruses on the floor, like on a 12-foot runway, and my body was covered in acrylic paint of different muted flesh colors, and my body became a redaction tool. So I glided up and down on this paper, and I redacted the viruses. So when you put the monitor inside of their stomachs, it looks like I'm an antibody. So it kind of has this sort of like hypochondriac bio warfare kind of like feeling, also kind of this religious feeling too. My obsession with the Caravaggio motif is because that paint that the image, the Doubting Thomas allegory is about Jesus proving that he is real when Saint Thomas he's skeptical and he's like, touch my wound, I'm real. And that painting was used in the church to promote faith to the illiterate, because painting was made for the illiterate. And I was thinking about, I don't know, I just feel like the zeitgeist right now is, we're so, like, it's just, truth is like fake news and truth and algorithms and there's in deep fakes. We're in a culture where we're like in this really weird Orwellian social media space where truth is definitely something that is to be suspicious of. And I feel like I have also personal, private reasons why I'm obsessed with it relating to my health. But it's something that like every time I use this metaphor and this piece and this image, it has a different function in the piece. So it's just one of those things. And on here, like the skins on the floor have drawings made by my mother on them as tattoos, and it's like their flesh. This is the Reifying Desire scene made into a sculpture. And this is a scene from Birds in Paradise made into a sculpture. the VR spaces. And also, after I finished Shrines, the final film in Birds in Paradise during COVID, so I finished the final chapter in 2020, and I felt like I was losing my mind making so many videos for 12 years, and I wanted to return to painting. So in 2021, I started to create an afterword to the series so I can move on. Cause I make work less and less with my Mother's Archive as I move on in life, and I was starting to develop these social practice works in Cleveland with the Black community, making them do architectural renderings of utopias. So I made like a public monument, which you will see, which is already up, but like it becomes a video game, and you will see it this summer. And I'm also doing other projects that are deeply social practice oriented for other major institutions that are coming up this year and next year. But one thing that has kept me healthy is making paintings again, because when I make paintings, I can focus on all of my principles that allowed me to be such a good filmmaker, and I can reestablish my confidence with tactility, and it allows me to re-enter, like the paintings make the films happen. So these are some of the these paintings are basically an afterwards for the Birds in Paradise series, and I wanted to make intimate, I wanted to, the whole thing about it when I did this during my studio museum in Harlem residency this last year, and the whole thing about it is that with these paintings, I wanted to deal with like the complete opposite of, like, I wanted to take all of the major conceptual motifs that made the films, like the storyboard and the mood boarding for the film, like all the major concepts that you see repeating throughout the film. But I wanted to focus on these themes with like very intimate alla prima paintings that were done, I guess, from a place that was more inward. And so each wall, sort like this wall, uh, the red wall is called Shrines, and it's basically the wall is most related to my animated films. It's like the this it's just yeah, it's just the kind of tableau that makes that film. The yellow wall is sort of it takes on the Doubting Thomas motif, but also it has a maypole and also a footage of me in a landscape. And this is sort of like the interior kind of like hyper. This is sort of like that is sort of like an this that those paintings are sort of like they're sort of liminal and existential and about like the impermanence of the body, and also like promoting like pagan rituals and promises of utopia in the future. And then this wall was sort of like I wanted to focus on, I guess, go completely out. Like I was making paintings about my lovers and my friends, my health, my fears, my hypochondria, my pathologies, my addiction. I kind of making, like this painting was done in 2018 after like doing lots of drugs at night with lovers and friends, and going home and feeling a delusion of grandeur with them, and taking photographs of each other in these Philip Perlstein Caravaggio kind of like, and Philip Perlstein, Picasso kind of compositions, and getting them developed and loving the composition so much that I felt like I had to sort of suspend it. And this painting is called Angels with Dirty Faces, Andy, and it has that tricky album cover in the foam. This is his lover, David. Angels with Dirty Faces, David. This is Boys Don't Cry. My best friend putting an earring in my ear, and he's like sort of someone who saved my life, got me back on the right track. And they're very personal. Like this is called what is this called? This is it's a maypole painting. Wait, I'll just skip that. This is called Fire in My Belly. This is called Ice in My Belly. And it's sort of like conceptually this is a multi double entendre, a triple entendre, and has layered personal meaning. But you see this scene in also We Are in Hell When We Hurt Each Other in Shrine. So like the thing is that I make scenes in my animations that potentially should be paintings, and sometimes I'll make paintings that I hope will become an animation. It's sort of kind of, it reminds me of how like when Matthew Barney would make films so he could make drawings at the end, or he'd do performances to make drawings at the end. Sometimes you have to do a lot of sculpture and filmmaking and experimental practices just so you can make a mark, a small mark, you know. This one's Holy Ghost Whitney. I wanted to paint, yeah, I wanted to like do portraits of black figuration that was atypical to like this cliche black joy that everyone is sort of doing. Yeah. I wanted black joy to be in liminal spaces that could be like a person inebriated. Like we can experience like pain, suffering, and joy at the same time, but what does it mean to suspend that space on a heavily meditated painting? This is me on this, the Son, Holy Ghost Lee. And this is the Father. This is the first painting I made that year in January. And it was, I haven't seen the things that I haven't, at the time I haven't seen my father in a long time. And he's like my hero or whatever. But then like, it was a premonition because 2 months later he had 2 heart attacks and a stroke. And it was sort of like me acknowledging or celebrating, like, I don't know, it was just weird. And it was weird because it's like very witchy, and that's like the magic of art making is that like it's sort of like a, sometimes you can, I don't know, sorry. So this is him at Sunday dinner being really inebriated. This is Shrines. It's one of the main tableaus from the scene that I actually created that scene because I wanted it to be a painting because I love like the geometric abstract qualities of it. When we pass from this clay, we'll still exist in the spirit. And that's that scene. Yeah. And so you saw the films from Birds in Paradise, so I feel like I don't have to be redundant and play them. I feel like we can move towards a Q&A. If you want, you know, I mean, well, one thing I can also do, because one thing I hated about the screening of Birds in Paradise is that we didn't get to see these in full screen. So I just want to play this final part. So this is how I wish the screening would have ended. Oh, wait, actually, I do want to talk about this. I'm sorry. Let's not do a Q&A. This piece, I know. So Birds in Paradise is really, I can't believe I wasn't not going to talk about that. Sorry. So like the whole series is crazy because it's we don't have much time, but this particular piece was created in 2020 when as soon as the lockdown started, I had a solo show at my like I just signed with Mitchell Innocent Nash in 2019 and I had to prepare for my first solo show there, but then like COVID came in and fucked us all over and we were in the lockdown and I had no money anymore for some reason and I just was like, what in the fuck is going on? I was like, the art world is over. It like got you can't like why am I making a solo show? Who's gonna see it? There's gonna have to you're gonna have to make what appointments to go see it? Like, wait, is this the last show of my life? So in a way I had this like penultimate kind of like creation theory moment where I was like, what the hell is this show gonna be about? And so for the first time, I felt like I was gonna make something direct because I couldn't focus. Because around that time, so during the summer, I was still like stuck and I was like making things, but just moving things around in the studio and in the animation program. And then Breonna Taylor got murdered, and then George Floyd got murdered, and then there was mad protests downstairs from my apartment. Like I'm hearing 5,000 white people say Black Lives Matter, and it was just like, what? And I'm like, I'm making art. I should be downstairs. Why am I making art? I was freaking out. And then I was also making this project with Solange for Parsons, and I was just trying to make money, and I was just like confused. And then I was like, the time was ticking, and the show was coming up. It was in October, and so I was like, oh well. The only thing I could think about making is this alternative to. And then I went to Beth Ann Hardison's house for a photo shoot for Interview magazine, and I got to know her and her history and how she basically gave Black women agency in the fashion world for like 30 years. Like her and Naomi Campbell and Iman, she founded Naomi. She's one of the people who founded Naomi Campbell, and she also started an agency with Naomi Campbell and Iman to basically make diversity happen for in the fashion world. And she was a consultant, like she was basically a pioneer for like building the Black female image up. So I thought she'd be an amazing Easter egg in the piece after filming her. And so you see this woman in this red outfit, Beth Ann Hardison, as the like goddess who is like manicuring this world. And what we are here when we heard each other is a proposal that what would a world be like if the Black woman had the most agency and she was immune to all objects flying at her. So I wanted to make a real deadpan video art piece. How video art is boring and repetitive. It's like, ugh. And I wanted to exhaust the viewer by making them watch a Black woman have adverse objects flying at her constantly. Biomolecular objects, bullets flying at her. And all she can do is destroy them, and nothing can hurt her, but they can hurt things around them. And then at the end, she evolves into this like bigger thing. And also you see these like COVID kind of like motifs, which you saw in the painting, the fire at my belly kind of thing. And then in the end, you see these like figures in gold Tyvek suits and these protesters, and you see these masked figures like fighting these orbs, and you see all this kind of crazy stuff. And then like the Black woman becomes these more evolved human being where her ponytail is like thriving and just snatching up all these like just crashing everything. And you see the nature is alive, but it can't hurt her. And then in the end, it goes to this you see it culminates with the Breonna Taylor shrine. And that was the way I dealt with that year. And then I had the solo show at Mitchell and Nash, and like 15 people saw it, or maybe more. I don't know, whatever. But this piece had a major life in 2021. It showed in the Gwangju Biennial and the Athens Biennial and Haussterkunst, and also the following piece, the sister piece, Shrines, which comes afterwards. I made Shrines literally. Most of my films take 8 months, 5 months, 6 months. After making We Are in Hell When We Hurt Each Other, I was just really manic. I was staying up till like 6 a.m. to finish the show, so I had a lot of creative energy in me, and I did some ketamine, and I made a new piece in 2 months. And I made Shrines. I made this piece. And this was like, the final, like the same kind of themes were taking place, where it was sort of like, Shrines is sort of like the summary of the Birds in Paradise series and all the politics that were happening at the time. And you just see sort of like like the reason why I like to embed screens within screens is because we live in an algorithm culture where we put our cell phones in our pockets and it can hear other people talking, and all of a sudden when you open it and look up in Instagram, there's ads that are trying to like brainwash you in a Orwellian 1984 way. Like it's like social puppeteering, And so I feel like as a person who like operates from zeitgeist, just like how Barnett Newman does. When Barnett Newman made zipline paintings, it was because skyscrapers was a new innovation, and we were thinking about industrial cities. And so I'm thinking about how we're like modified by like screens and ads and information. And like if you like put screens all over a CGI world, it basically defines what that space is and what that psychology of that space is. And so you kind of see that in this film. But anyway, that's Birds in Paradise. The whole series. Lots of crazy dense shit, but like, let's do a Q&A. And I hope you enjoyed this long ass day. Thank you. maybe I'll play like, you know what I'll play? I'll play this while I'll put this on, just like full screen, while we're doing a Q&A. All right. Hi. Any questions? Okay.
Hi. When you were working during the pandemic and you said that you were inspired by protests and other movements, I'm curious, were there other visual motifs outside of the Birds in Paradise scene that we saw, or other themes from that time period that made your way into that work? I know you said you were making work really quickly. I'm
You
just,
mean like I mean, I was shooting all the protests with my iPhone. You see that in one of the
yeah,
scenes.
yeah. I guess I'm just more curious about that process and what that looks like for you.
Oh, it was very organic. I'm very like cavalier about my process. Not cavalier. I'm like, I was just living my life with my iPhone. I would just shoot. I just was like, I kind of just like shoot and collect data. I have like 17 terabytes of data, and I just like, you know, if something speaks to me, I put it in the piece. And like, what do you mean? The process was sort of, it's. Can you ask that question again? I probably can anchor it better.
I think you definitely answered it when you were talking about using your iPhone footage. I'm
Yeah.
just curious to what your process looked like in the pandemic and how the pandemic specifically affected your process differently than your process outside of living in those parameters.
Well, the funniest thing about it is that like the work before the pandemic was such a premonition. Like the earlier chapters were sort of like this psychic premonition that it was all going to go down, because Blessed Avenue was about climate change. It was about complicity and climate change. It was about like, it was sort of like that movie Don't Look Up with Leonardo DiCaprio, when you see these, but on the left channel you see like, let me go to it. On the left channel you'll see, so before the pandemic I made Blessed Avenue, which is this piece where you see like a lot of like weird climate catastrophe stuff in this area. And then in this area you see a lot of S&M figures like perform like a slave master dialectic, where you don't know who the slave and the master in this, but everyone's kind of controlling each other, and they're all connected with these like they're all tethered to each other with these like weird neon bondage cords in a machinic space, and they're sort of like partying. So it's sort of like they're complicit with their party space while things are melting down outside, and you see forest fires on the right, and you see ice melting and bacteria coming from the ice and creating sort of like a pandemic. This was made in 2018, and then in 2019 I started to focus on, like, it was just strangely psychic how like the whole thing about Blessed Avenue was sort of like a weird penultimate like late capitalism didactic kind of like animation. And I'm not a didactic kind of person, but like it had that kind of vibe. And so when the pandemic went down, and it's still happening, you know, when the lockdown happened, I I mean, I suffer from anxiety and stress a lot, and so the only thing I couldn't breathe because I felt embarrassed about how discovering the true nature of white people once George Floyd died, and everybody was like, "Are you okay? Are you? Can I come bring you a apple pie?" Like, it got this pandering thing start to happen, and I was like, "Wait, white people have been feeling guilty this whole time?" Like, I don't know. I just felt like really nervous. I felt like so vulnerable. I felt embarrassed, and I felt I felt like I was losing everything from like I was losing like everything I learned as a like I can't, I'm being so honest right now. It was just really like traumatizing. I felt like, how do I didn't know how to function. I was very isolated. I didn't have any my family or friends. I was like working alone in my apartment, literally like I was like Tom Hanks in Castaway, growing a giant beard, talking to myself, doing drugs and as coping mechanism, and like a lot of shrooms and like and I was recording footage on my iPhone, and I was just animating to keep busy and finding like metaphors and repetition. And it just like once I was like hanging out in the streets and going to there was a lot of underground forest raves in Brooklyn. That was the coolest part about the lockdown, is that there was so much. People were bringing like these massive subwoofers in the deep woods of Queens, and we was like not we was sort of like radical because we weren't wearing masks. We were like partying and like in these like dense raves in the woods, like underground people, and like being radical and strange, kind of being like negligent and like self-destructive and like very post-apocalyptic. And it inspired everything. It just inspired my sensibility to shift. I became a much more sophisticated and patient and wiser person from like feeling like everything is lost and appreciating, the now. And I think that I like went from like a decadent kind of Caligula world kind of person before 2020, and after 2020, I just like I don't know. I feel like I just grew up. I don't know what I just said now. I just I just yeah, whatever. Yeah. Okay.
Hi, I just want to say thank you. This was very vulnerable, and I want to say that I'm very proud of you because it must have taken so much of your own. And I'm saying this very, like, intentionally while I see you, that it takes a lot to be able to be this vulnerable and to be able to tap into your mother's vision, the way, and being able to recognize her as she tapped into source. And what I want to ask, well, there's so many questions running through my head, but mostly it's how did most of your visions come, like, well, that's broad, but I guess how are ways that you are able to see your mother now after now recognizing her own language and like perceiving the world, and like how are these ways that you're able to see yourself or experience the world?
Um, Thank you for everything you just said. I appreciate it. Can you ask the final question? How do I see my mother? Say that again. How do I?
Yeah, so I guess I'm also trying to formulate the question, but through like being able to like see and recognize how your mother tapped into source and like exist through life by being able to express her visions and your visions together, how are you able to see her now
Oh
and
yeah.
yourself?
Oh yeah, for sure. I did learn. That's a really great question because that is, now that like, like she'll always have a presence and a spirit in my practice no matter what I do, whether I reference the drawings or the music or not, because I am her son and I actually am her apprentice for life. And I traced her drawings for a decade with my hand. And so therefore like that body memory is within me forever. It's sort of like when you do martial arts, it's sort of like, yeah, I've traced her sensibility through her sonic expression and through mapping out her drawings and building it into architecture. And therefore, meditating on that graphite, I don't know, I kind of like co-opted her sensibility in order to understand all like like I feel like she had a lot of pain that and a lot of joy that sort of mapped out her pathology that became schizophrenia and becoming a brilliant artist. And I learned her sensibility so I can live a better life. And what do I learn about her? I don't know. I learned so much, but what did I come out with? Well, she's dead, and in 2016 she died, and I I don't know what I could normally answer that question, but for some reason I can't right now. But I know what I came out of this with is that um what I did learn is how I was always enamored by how I didn't understand how she had such a like infinite surrealist and creative sensibility. Like she I didn't understand like her autonomy as an artist, and how did she I didn't understand like how she did it. Like I didn't understand what she was tapping into to be so prolific. And I feel like when I was younger, I was so derivative, and I wanted to be like a Leipzig school painter, like Neo Rauch and Daniel Richter, and then I was obsessed with Albert Olin. I was obsessed with all these white men in Europe who were like popping and rock stars and like post Berlin Wall expression, and it was very like jargony, and I thought I had to be I was subscribing to a lot of Western canon shit, nothing that was inward. And after like going inward and learning about her practice and tracing her style and mapping it out through a very personal and introspective body of work that I just shared with you, I learned how to make art. I learned that I cannot not make art. It's like in me, it's in my blood and my spirit, and I have like 1,000 more things to say and do. And I feel like I came out thriving. I feel like I am literally, after doing this body of work, going through so much pain to make it, I am at peak joy now. I'm at complete rest. I like know how to, I feel like my cortisol is regulated. I feel like, it's like I developed like a natural SSRI, and I just know how to make art now. I know how to fucking make art. That's what I came out. I know like what art is for, what it comes from, and I feel unstoppable. So if you just I feel like you haven't seen anything yet. That's how I feel. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I'm not speaking well today. Like normally I'm like I know exactly what I want to say, but kind of like foggy. Any more questions?
I have one.
Yeah.
So, switching it up a little bit, I really enjoyed just the performance aspect of your work and these incredible stages that you built and worlds that you built for yourself and others to perform on. And I guess it's a technical question about motion capture and yeah, your process in capturing performance and putting it into your animations and your films.
Oh, how about motion capture? Yeah, I mean, well, the thing about it is that so like when I do like green screen performances and motion capturing, it's very like an animism based kind of dance performance practice where I'm thinking about all the objects from the drawings or objects that are related to the narrative, or kind of like what can I do consistently where I can like build movement cycle assets and then string them together to create narratives. Like it's very technical. It's inspired by like Pina Bausch and William Forsythe's like um his like movement practice that's based on drawing and accenting space. And like there was these YouTube schematic videos of his dancers drawing, and they make these like golden ratio kind of like contour lines within the movement. It really inspired me to actually organize my visual space like by having movement be anchored by like a suite of objects. it's so I have like a space to be improvisational and wild and free, but within a limit. So when I go back to the computer, I can divide them into hundreds of assets that I can populate in a world, and then be a true surrealist and create consistent narrative. So when I go into the mocapping studio, I have these suite of movements that I'm thinking about. So when I go into Motion Builder, I can type hammer movement. I can type big pussy movement. I'm joking. That was just big pussy movement. I just thought I'd say that. Asshole. Diva. Geneva. No, so it's like really funny. I actually if you went to my hard drive, you'd see the craziest titles, like you know, like I don't know. I was gonna say something really funny, but anyway, no. So it's like I basically build asset. So basically, like yeah, the mocap is like that, and like when you see like We Are in Hell When You Hurt Each Other, when I'm like, this is my movement actually, like like my favorite one, like here. Sorry. Hold on, here we go. Wait. Oh yeah. So like right here is like all these women are basically that's my body. But like this for instance. And so like when I'm on the green screen, I'm thinking, oh, I'm like an average, I'm imagining that happen. So it's all about like animism, imagination, just playing pretend like a little 5-year-old, That's pretty much the answer to that question. Like, I hope this isn't recorded and put on YouTube. This cannot go on YouTube.
Thank you so much for sharing your work. It's really inspirational. I was just wondering what currently is inspiring your work moving forward. I know that you said that you've moved away from animation and more into painting. So I was wondering what the next creative venture will be.
Oh, I'm still making animations. I'm making a huge project. I'm doing a music video out. I'm doing a visual album for a artist you may know coming soon. I'm making 2 video games. I'm doing 2 public artworks, one at a major institution in New York that's gonna come out in the fall, and another one in the fall of 2023. Like I'm doing a lot of major big installations and permanent public artworks and outdoor sculpture and video games. And I think video game is going to happen a lot. The funniest thing is that I don't play video games. When I was a kid, I played video games from like age 2 to like 20 something. And then I became a full-time academic artist in school and like didn't have much time to play video games. But the sensibility is tattooed in my brain because when I played video games, I was masterful at it. Like I beat Final Fantasy VII like 7 times, and I got Knights of the Round, which is, if anyone plays that game, they know that's like pathological and psycho that you would like master all your characters' levels and to get that. But I like was obsessive at playing games because it was the way for me to cope with cancer. And so like making games now just feels natural to me because I understand like the objectivity around it. But like, yeah, I'm making games. I don't want to, but I'm making them. That's what I'm doing. I'm doing like everything. But painting is like what's binding it all together and making it feel fun again. Because it felt like, I think painting is like a passive productivity. It's something that's more visceral and it comes from like, mark making is really primal. It's like, it goes back to cave painting and it's very ancient. So it's like, there's a diasporic kind of artistic connectivity that I tap in when I make paintings that really don't exist when you make digital art because it's rather new in the human sensibility. And so when connecting back to painting has allowed me to have so much more confidence when I go to my computer upstairs. I moved into a brownstone. So I rent out 2 floors, and the downstairs is like the painting studio, and upstairs is the digital studio with my bedroom, and it's so much more space. And so like when I go downstairs and I make paintings listening to Fran Lebowitz podcast, and I'm just and Red Scare and Weird and The Read, and I don't know. Then I go back upstairs and I effortlessly make digital work. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm more holistic, more well-rounded, and doing what I want to do. God, I hope this isn't recorded. When I'm 40, I'm gonna look back at this in a really funny way.
Hey, thank you so much. How has your process of musical collaboration evolved?
Oh, good question. I love making music with Nick so much. How has it evolved? Well, now I've been like, now I'm currently working with someone else's music, but I'm hoping to I am hoping, I'm hoping to branch off with that person and make something new. But I'm making new music. I'm making a new EP that will be an album by 2023. I think I want to make albums for the rest of my life, in some kind of form or fashion. And, like I want to always try to find a way to collaborate with people and make soundscapes for my animations and videos, because I'm such a music fan. Like, I have like, it's sort of like I can't not, I think the music strangely is, they're like the arteries to all of the other processes. And similar how painting is, the music is also like a primal expression that, like when me and Nick would make demos, I would play the demos before they were mastered while I'm making all the other things. While they're making a sculpture at the fabric workshop, or if like the demos would become like, how people like make a music video. There were music videos for my sculptures, or how I would animate. Like if I was making I remember I was making the song Blessed Avenue, and I only could think about like, cool hues and blue period paintings by Picasso. I was thinking about like how the light looks at 5 a.m. when you're coming home from like a night out, and I was going to my computer and trying to like, how do I like concretize, like how do I take this synth and this sample that we were like, this synthesizer, this like sample from like Pro Tools and Ableton, and how do I express that with like a Maya shaders, like a blend texture on top of a polygonal surface, and how do I use this like directional light with this sort of like, atmospheric blending to like how do I like express Blessed Avenue sonically into a visual form? How do I do that with paint? How do I do that with sculpture? Like music is very like, yeah, I mean, I cannot not have music be a part of my practice. The way it evolved, hopefully I don't know. I want to make my video game soundtrack really important. I remember when I was a kid, and I loved the Final Fantasies music score person. I forgot his name, but he's major. Like I was thinking, like I can't believe somebody in Japan literally got paid to make like 100 hours of music for this game, and they took it so seriously. Like you made this for a niche ass audience. Like you could have you could have gone to the Lincoln Center and like, but you like that's what was so cool about like those scores for those RPG games were so complex and incredible. Like I can't believe like someone Like that was their life's journey to make a niche ass video game score. So I think that's something I think about. Like how can I like, I guess I'm that way. I invest my like sound practice into not like mainstream world, but for my own little weird niche arts thing. Like I don't really care if this, like even though I put them on iTunes and Spotify and like promote them and hopefully they get a little, like there was a track from the album that got a Pitchfork review and I was so happy. But like I don't really care. I like having like a cult following for the music and it being like this secret.
We have time for one more question. Do we have one more question?
Wait, there's no more questions?
Thank you. Thank you for sharing such beautiful work.
Thank you.
I'm over here in the corner.
Who? Oh, hey.
Yeah, I was just curious, especially since we're on a college campus, if your work changed much from when you were a student to when you kind of entered the workspace, and if it did change, in what ways?
How did my work change from being a student to like being a like professional?
Yeah.
Oh, well, it changed a lot, but you come full circle. I think life is very cyclical. I think like like right now, I guess 16 years later since some parts of my schooling, I'm back at some of those sensibilities. Some of those things are coming full circle. Like I thought that I completely bastardized myself from my former self, but like time is a flat circle. Like, how did I change? I changed 100%, turned myself inside out, then went back to my old ass ways. Like I'm painting again and like, I don't know, I'm thinking about I'm actually taking a lot of dormant ideas that were put in the attic or on my hard drive. And sometimes it like, actually like when I was in Skowhegan, so right here was done when I was 23. And it was in my hard drive for 10 years. I didn't know what to do with it because it was so loaded. And I knew that this scene was based on like, it was like a fictional Nigerian Gelede masquerade tradition. I wanted to do something ambiguously. I wanted to do something that like was about healing and cleansing, like a ritual where they like flogged my body and it was invisible and you saw water tanks inside of me. But I wanted these figures to wear white Tyvek suits because I like the like liminal place between like torture and healing. And when I knew that the signifier behind creating a scene like this would be like, oh, is this like is this like a cult or the Ku Klux Klan in the future, or is this a Blade Runner Afrofuturist kind of like cleansing ritual? And I liked playing with that in between space, but I made this performance at Skowhegan School for Painting and Sculpture when I was 23 years old, and I wasn't ready for it, and so I put it on my hard drive, and then at age 34, I was making Birds in Paradise, and I was making all these motifs that was centering back to this idea, and the hard drive started vibrating, and I was like, oh, this is the function of this. So like what I'm saying is, how did I change? I'm the same OG. Yeah. So that's like an example of how, how do I change? I've changed 100%, but like at the same time, I found clarity with a lot of my earlier expressions that didn't have form yet, and I'm just like wiser and I know what I'm doing now. That's how, I don't know. I guess that answers that question. Yeah. No. Thank you.